Hey everybody, welcome back to the Senators Roundtable. I'm your host Jacob Billington, joined by just Dayton this week. Last week we had just Paul. Dayton, how did the Saskatoon Blades do at the game you went to?
Not great.
Did you have a good time though?
Yeah, I did have a good time, but they lost like 10 seconds into overtime. It
Yeah,
was the sixth overtime in 7 games.
it was a good
Yeah,
series. It was tight.
it was so tight, and seeing the Warriors give it to the Portland Winterhawks is somewhat satisfying. Just because I think if the Blades had been the one on top instead, then I think they would have been in a similar situation. So, like, being that close sucks, but also I don't know. Very
Yeah,
torn, split feelings.
it's like the argument: would you rather lose in the first round to the eventual Stanley Cup champions? Like, does that help soften the blow if you were kind of took them to seven? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's not a ton of Senators news to come out over this week. I mean, the playoffs have been extremely exciting, and we've all kind of been keeping an eye on that. But um, for the Senators, we're kind of in draft mode. We're going to hold off on our draft conversations for a couple weeks. Dayton and I have actually a premium Substack coming out tomorrow that we kind of combined and did a power ranking of our top eight ideal draft candidates. So maybe next week or the following week, we'll kind of recap that and let that sink in a little bit. But there's some pretty exciting names for Ottawa to be available at seventh overall, which is a pick they've never used before. They've never used a seventh overall. The last time that they had it, they traded it for Alex DeBrincat, and they've never actually selected a player seventh. So we're gonna steer away from the draft stuff for now, and let's talk about a little bit of a prospect update. So Lassi Thompson today signed in the Swedish Hockey League. I fully expected it. Somebody told me that he's not going to be back, and I 100% believe them. Didn't give them any doubt. What do you think of Lassi Thompson? He's still part of the Senators organization, but where do you sit as of today with just kind of how ever since the pick was made? What do you think of Lassi Thompson and his path to now signing in the SHL?
Yeah, it's a tough one to put into words because of the way that it was introduced. He was never going to be the person that Pierre Dorion thought he was going to be. I think most scouts would have told you that. So when he was picked, it's like, okay, so you have a potential top four defenseman. He's a good puck mover, good skater, and then didn't really develop well over the lockouts, or not the lockouts, but the pandemic shortened seasons.
Yeah,
Um, and didn't really get opportunities. This last season was maybe one of the worst, getting claimed on waivers twice. Uh, didn't get any call ups as far as I can remember. Didn't look fantastic in the minors. I mean, he was fine, but you'd expect someone
yeah.
a little bit better for, I think he was a top 16 pick, wasn't he?
19th overall, I believe.
19th. Okay, I knew he was close.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 21 points, 67 games. I don't want to say it's a waste, but it should have been so much better.
Yeah. I, it was never a pick that was going to work out. It just never felt like it. He was never really given a true chance. I feel like he's one of the players that would have done better getting thrown to the Wolves in the NHL. So like we saw with Jacob Bernard Docker, took a few years to kind of sit and brew a little bit. And with Lassi Thompson, it was a while until he got his shot. He was selected in 2019, played a season and a half in Finland, and then came over to Belleville. He got a 16 game stint in Ottawa in 2021-22. And then he had 2 games last season, I think. So nothing real exciting for NHL opportunities. He did have a really good season last year in the AHL. He had 33 points in 56 games and played some pretty good defensive play. Like he was a good two-way guy. And people were kind of wondering if this was going to be the year for him to kind of break in and maybe take the role that Jacob Bernard Docker had this year, or a lot of people were hoping he would take the role that Travis Hamonic had this year and just get him into the NHL, see what he really is. And that just didn't happen in preseason training camp. He got waived, claimed by the Ducks, and then reclaimed by the Senators. Um, it kind of felt like he was doomed from the get go. I can't even put it into words like you said. It never felt like it was meant to be. And I felt the same about Jacob Bernard Docker for a while, and this year he kind of proved that he is that guy. But those back-to-back first-round picks, Lassi Thomson and Jacob Bernard Docker, did not age very well. You'd like to see a little bit better out of Bernard Docker for, was he 26th overall, 28th overall? But he's panning out fine now. Going to be a solid bottom four guy. But with Lassi Thomson, it's no surprise that he's going to the SHL. He reached a dead end in North America.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the defensive prospects that the Senators had at that time have hit a similar wall. Like Eric Brandstrom has done well because he's a very skilled player, but he's not playing the way that he should have been. Right? They've turned him into a defensive specialist at 5'10", and like, great, you got a Chris Russell type guy in your bottom six, or not bottom six, bottom four. That's fine, but when you paid Mark Stone to get that, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Lassi Thompson, high pick or high-ish, right?
Yeah.
Had the potential to be a top four puck moving defenseman, and they just never gave him the chance. And you could tell at the end of the interviews last year, he had such a strong season and was given 2 games. He was bummed. Right? He was frustrated. He wanted bigger shots and he didn't get it, even though he should have. And then with the Senators' mess of a cap situation, he was forced onto waivers, and I think that killed it. I think the Senators at the beginning of this season killed all hopes of having Thompson in their franchise moving forward. And yeah, his rights are still owned, but he's not back. He's done with Ottawa, I think.
Yeah. Did you know that Ottawa still owns Vitaly Abramov's rights too? Like it's gonna be that kind of
Oh,
situation.
he's not coming back either.
No.
They burned too many bridges with too many of their good prospects. And not saying that Thompson would have fixed things or Abramov would have fixed things, but having, some of those mid-tier guys pay off would have been much better than what it became.
Yeah. A couple of names. So I just brought up 2019 Senators
No.
prospect ranking. This list, and this is Corey Pronman from the Athletic. So subtractions and graduates before we get into this. And I just kind of want to read through this pretty quick. So Brady Tkachuk, Colin White, and then some other great names: Christian Yaros, Christian Wolanin, Rudolph Balcers, and Maxime Lajoie. Those are the graduates out of this. Other than Tkachuk and Colin White, that's a lot of blah. So
yeah. Well,
um,
Jaros and Wolanin were 2 guys who also, I think, got kicked to the curb a little bit. They had potential. They had the ability to be kind of those bottom four guys, and they just weren't given the shot, and they stagnated.
Yeah. So looking through this list, Corey Pronman did actually a fantastic job of, like, this ranking is pretty accurate. I would say that this is 90% correct with how it turned out. So number 1, Drake Batherson. Yeah, he's absolutely number 1. Number 2, Eric Brandstrom. At the time, that's very valid. And to be honest, looking at the rest of this list, he's probably the second best prospect at the time, even now. Number 3, Alex Formenton. We all know what happened there. He was on a great trajectory. Logan Brown, number 4. That's a name I haven't heard of in a while. Number 5 was Josh Norris. And then number 6, Lassi Thomson. So Thompson was a bit higher regarded. And the tier for his prospect is very good / legit bubble prospect. That didn't pan out as well. But I mean, that's kind of the thought that when he was drafted. Then you got Mad Sogard, Jacob Bernard Docker, Vitaly Abramov, Joey Decord, Philip Schlappick, Parker Kelly, Max Verno, Jonathan Davidson, and Marcus Hogberg. And then Shane Pinto and Philip Gustafson. Wow. So they're a bit lower than obviously they deserve to be in hindsight. But no, like, there's not a lot of exciting names in there. 2 years into the rebuild. And here we are today, far out of the playoffs with the 7th overall pick. And I don't know if our prospect pool for the Senators is much better than that. So,
yeah, I would think that a lot of Senators fans, would, excuse me, would kind of assume, or not assume, but trying to think of the right words. Like the Pierre Dorion era is one that is difficult to quantify because there were some real good moments. But I think to see how quickly all of those moves are souring maybe reveals something about Dorion that no Senators fan wanted to acknowledge during his tenure. Yeah, like the Thompson pick was hailed as this is the guy we can build around.
Yeah.
And no one would have said that at the draft other than Dorion. But
Right.
to see him leave for nothing. And the 2021 draft, which was, like, hey, we have so many good guys. The public don't know what they're talking about. Um, I think they're all but like two guys are still with the organization. They just let them go.
Yeah. So
That's
the
bad.
2021 draft, Tyler Boucher. That's we could talk about that one another day.
Mm,
Zach Ostapchuk. That's a
good.
really good pick. Ben Roger wasn't signed. He went back and re-entered the draft. Wasn't selected again, which is telling. Oliver Johansson, meh. He's a prospect.
Working on it. Yeah.
Carson Latimer and Chandler Romeo. They're both none of them were signed. So three of the six picks already, less than 3 years after that draft, are not in the organization.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a terrible draft. And then you got Tyler Boucher, who I don't know. But the 2022 draft, we can kind of move on to that and just talk a little bit of a prospect update here. A lot more there was a lot more picks, but there was also a lot more positive picks coming out of it. So Oscar Pedersen looks to be okay, but Stephen Halliday has had all eyes on him over the past couple of weeks. He did absolutely fantastic during the Belleville Senators. I almost said Binghamton. Wow, the Belleville
Updating
Senators
yourself.
playoff run. Um, yeah, that's I don't know where that came from, but Stephen Halliday has done very well. He is an excellent playmaker. He's got good size. He's got good skating. I think that he's got a lot of the attributes that are needed to kind of make that transition. I think he could do really well as like a third line scoring winger.
Mhm. Totally.
Jorian Donovan, he's doing really well. He did good in the OHL this year. Cam O'Neill, he had an okay season in the NCAA. A couple other names in there, but not a ton of standouts. And then last draft, I mean, Hoyt Stanley, Matthew Antonovsky, Owen Beckner, Vladimir Nikitin. Nikitin did have a really good season in the BCHL, but it's the
Yeah, he's an interesting
BCHL.
guy. Yeah.
So take that as you will. And Nick Van Tassel, I don't know if over the course of the season I heard any of those names. Like I at the draft looked at them, said, "Cool, this is what we got." I don't know if I heard any of their names through the course of this season. Like they're just all blah. I mean, it was a fourth round pick, a fifth round pick, and three seventh round picks. That's all
Well,
Ottawa had.
it was another draft of just like adding role players.
Yeah,
Hoyt Stanley had the most upside of all of them, and I don't think he passes a second pairing defensive defenseman.
yeah,
Right? He's a big, lanky defender. That's what he does. That's he won't put up points, and we're seeing that in is he Cornell?
yes. I want to say he's at Cornell.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's playing NCAA anyways,
Yeah.
and like fine, but I think he had maybe less than 10 points this year.
He had
Um,
10 in 35 games.
it was at 10. Okay,
Yeah.
I hadn't checked in a minute. So yeah, like intriguing, but there's not a lot of offensive upside. Andonovsky is a tough guy. Um, Van Tassel is a late round pick.
Yeah.
Cam O'Neill, I think, was another overage pick that Dorian loved doing.
Yeah.
I think.
Just a lot of blah.
Yeah.
That's and I mean,
And that's kind of the way that you maybe talk about most of the picks with Dorian,
yeah.
especially now that that era has ended. And it's just, meh, really? All right.
Yeah. outside of the 2020 draft, Dorion did not really have many good drafts. I mean, the 2017 draft, Alex Formanton and Drake Batherson, that was fantastic. But
Yep.
your first round pick was Shane Bowers. I think
That was yikes. Okay.
he has less than 10 NHL games. 2018, that was good. You got Kachuk and Bernard Docker in the first round there. Bernard Docker, I didn't realize, but he already hit the 100 game mark. He has 104 games played. So
Really?
yeah, I guess it's hard to say that that's underwhelming. I guess his play, I mean, 16 points. He's not all about the points, but
Never was going
um,
to be.
yeah. And then you got Johnny Tyconic, Jonathan Gruden, Crookshank, Mandalisi, and then Yakov Novak and Luke Lohite. Blah. Like outside of Crookshank, the rest of that,
Yeah.
outside of the first round, outside of Crookshank, it's just meh. And you got Lassi Thompson in that 2019, and then Shane Pinto, Mad Sogard, Mark Kastelik, and Max Gunnett. 2019, that was a pretty good draft. Okay.
Yep.
2020, all timer. And then we just talked about the last three. So just, you're right. Like a lot of just meh drafts.
Yeah. And even the guys that they hit on, like some of the underrated picks, were not mm, they're not high potential guys. Like they're succeeding. Like Angus Crookshank could be a second line guy, and that would be
Yeah.
amazing. Probably a third line guy, but
But at the
he's in the
same
middle.
time, he was drafted the same year as Brady Kachuk.
Yeah,
And he still has what, 12 NHL games, 13?
something like that. Yeah. Accents
Yeah.
Gwinnett could be a second pairing defenseman, probably
Yeah.
more so a third pairing,
Yeah.
but you're just not getting a lot of potential. And they kept adding role and depth guys when they could have added potential.
Yeah.
And you see other teams like the Sabres and the Red Wings who went out and drafted high potential guys with all of their picks, or at least most of them, and they hit on more of them. So, yeah, not to get like super down on Dorion's time. It's tough to think of an optimistic thought when you're starting to look at the draft. Like, yes, Steos has a completely brand new track record. Let's see what he does. But he's got a lot of work to do to make this team uh complete.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned that Steos, this is his first draft. I don't know. Like, obviously, one draft, you're not going to really set trends for yourself and what kind of things you like to do in the draft. But it'll be interesting to see if he deviates from what Dorion liked to do. Who is their uh, head amateur scout
I think
now?
no,
I don't.
they got rid of their pro scout.
I just looked it up on their website. Uh, Mikko Ruutu is their chief European scout. They don't have
Okay.
a head amateur scout. They didn't name one after firing Mann. Um,
That's
so
who it was.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this group comes together. Obviously, people aren't focusing too much on the amateur scouts in an organization. That's just not something people do. The head scout, yes, but it'll be interesting to see what this group of people can kind of collaborate and come up with, and what
Mhm.
Steos likes to do, and especially with the seventh, and it's likely going to be the 28th overall draft pick, or 27th or something like that.
Yeah, it'll
So
be late for sure.
it'll be interesting to see what Ottawa does, and if they want to trade up, if that's something they want to do, get kind of a high skill guy. Like if one of these top 15 players start sliding a little bit, trade up a little bit, and try and pick one up. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Yep.
Um, Last week, Paul and I talked about Travis Green. There's not much else to really talk about. I just kind of want to get your general thoughts on the hiring in itself.
I saw a lot of people hating on it, and I was always kind of curious why there was so much hate. Like, yeah, you didn't get the big name coaches, but
Yeah.
you weren't going to. I don't know if that's too harsh to say.
I think that's not fair to say anymore because it's not a Dorian Melnick team, and Ottawa does have a lot of young prospects and or young stars coming up. I do think that Berube did consider it and McClellan considered it and whatnot, but I do get your point.
Yeah, not to say that Ottawa couldn't get them, but there was a lot of open positions, a lot more attractive positions, and the Senators did not do well. So why would a coach who has a really good track record want to come to an underperforming team? So, like Steos, when he was hired, was, kind of an up and coming candidate for a top GM spot, but not a big name,
Yeah, that's fair.
right? I think that's the same thing with Travis Green. He's not a big name. He's a bit of an up and comer. He coached really well in the AHL, got a job with the Canucks, who, didn't do super well, but the Canucks were kind of a mess.
Yeah.
And it's unfair to place all of his poor-ish record on him and not on the makeup of that team. They've made a lot of changes since, and putting Tocchet in the coaching position has helped that situation. Partly because they have, a better team construction. And he was also not a popular pick, right?
Right.
People did not want Tocchet
Yeah.
because he didn't have really a great coaching record either. I think Green is smart. I think he has a lot of talent. I think he works well with younger players, which
Hmm.
the Senators still are. But he's not a pushover, right? He was more of a tough guy in the NHL.
Yeah.
He would be a Berube light, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Both have that, that grinder, that in your face kind of personality that I think will make the Kachuk led Senators a lot more formidable. He will probably need some time for adjustment. Hopefully that only takes a few months and not a full season. Usually a new coach does. I like the hiring. I think it is one that has a lot of potential because I think a lot of teams do turn to the big names and think this will solve our problems. And then when it doesn't, it's like, terrible, bad, fired. And it's
Yeah.
all on the coach. And this has to be a team effort.
One thing that stood out to me over the last week was Mark Mathot's tweet. I don't know if you saw it.
No, I missed that one.
I'm going to bring it up so I can make sure I'm not misquoting him. Um, but he was talking about the fact that people put too much emphasis on so here it is. Unpopular opinion, but there's way too much emphasis on head coaches in the NHL. It's ridiculous now. Team success hinges mostly on the leaders and core players. Everybody knows it, but not enough people want to talk about it. In the salary cap era, it's just easier to dump the coach instead. I 100% agree. I think that people put way too much emphasis on who the head coach is. They talk about the systems too much. And I'm guilty for it too. But that's just how NHL kind of media and fans are now. And I just think that a lot of it does come down to like how much learning do these players really need? Like, what are you going to come in and teach Claude Giroux, right? And after all these years, what are you going to come in and teach Thomas Chabot? Like, can you really change Thomas Chabot's game? Or at this point, Brady Tkachuk? You could, I'd say Tim Stützle, Shane Pinto, they still have some molding they could do. But like, you can't really come in and teach these things. You can tell them we want to be more aggressive on the forecheck. Okay, that's a little bit of style, but and coaches do play an important role, but I think there's too much emphasis on the role that they play. And I think Mark Mathot is absolutely correct.
Yeah, 100% there with you. I think you guys, well, I think Mathot hit the nail on the head with that. And yeah, I think what you can blame the coach for is deployment.
Yeah.
Because he's the one who kind of controls who goes out on the ice, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, you should blame DJ King. No, DJ Smith. Yikes. Okay. It's been a long day. Um, you can blame DJ Smith for not playing some of the defensive prospects when they got called up. I think he had his favorites, and those who weren't his favorites weren't played. That is bad, and I think that hurt the team. You can't blame him for the Senators continuously underperforming night in and night out. That has to do with the core. That has to do with the players on the team.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing it, and especially if they don't do it coming up, there's going to be some big changes. And I think Steos is kind of holding his cards close to his chest and bringing in a new guy who can bring a new perspective. Travis Green certainly will. And really evaluating this team for what it is. And I think this is kind of the make or break year.
I think having a fresh slate for a coach is a really good thing.
Mhm.
One thing that I've noticed is everything is about like the label that you have as a player. So if you go look at the Carolina Hurricanes, they scratched Evgeny Kuznetsov in the playoffs, like game two of the second round. They scratched him. Now, is Evgeny Kuznetsov the kind of player you want to scratch? Absolutely not. And is he playing well? Absolutely. He's done some fantastic things. He took a stupid penalty that led to a power play goal for the Rangers, and he got scratched the next game. His the perception around Kuznetsov over the last year and a half, 2 years has been he's taken a step back and whatnot, but he really hasn't been playing bad. The Capitals have just been getting older and less offense. I mean, Ovechkin barely cracked 30 goals this year. Did he even hit 30? Yeah, he hit 30. I think he got 31. Um, and just all that kept taking a step back. But since coming to Carolina, Kuznetsov's been really good, but he's been getting scratched. So it's all about like the label that you have as a player. And can you scratch this guy? Like if Sebastian Aho was making the same mistakes, he's not going to get scratched, right? And I know Sebastian Aho is much better than Kuznetsov today, but it's just the identity that a player has is all that matters. And so coming in with a fresh slate for Travis Green, saying, okay, well, maybe you're not going to scratch Tim Stützle or Brady Tkachuk on these nights, but maybe he's going to be more willing to sit Drake Batherson for a night if he's making silly mistakes, or he's going to sit Thomas Chabot for a night. Maybe I don't know. I'm not saying he should, just depending on the play and whatnot, but maybe he's going to be more willing to do that. Hold players more accountable. Kind of say, listen, I think you need to watch from the overhead and kind of just relook at the game, see how things are played. I don't know. I just think that we didn't see any accountability from DJ Smith, at least publicly. Again, I don't know what goes on in the locker room, but it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how he approaches things with a new team.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's gonna wrap things up for today. We again, there's not a whole bunch to talk about. Diving into some old draft classes is always fun. And yeah, just getting your thoughts on Travis Green. So, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a like and a comment, and we'll see you next week.